Well, good morning. Welcome to today's event. I'm just waiting for people to join. This is our lesson event exploring energy flexibility through an integrated approach. Hi, Richard. And a specific sort of focus on transport today. I have data on there for apologies, but it should be on transport. So hi, Tim. So if we can go to our next slide, please. Tabitha, that'd be great. So we'll be recording today's event. If you could keep your microphones muted, and we'll have our chat open. So if there's any pertinent questions you want to ask our presenters today, please feel free to pop them in the chat. We will have a Q&A at midday and a panel discussion as well. So you will get your questions answered during the course of this event. And also feel free to introduce who you are, what organization you work for, and any support or help that you need. Nice to see familiar faces. Hi, Ash. Coming to today's event, and we expect a really good event looking at the presentations that we have. If we could just go to our next slide, Tabitha, have a look at our agenda. So I'll start with a bit of an update in terms of lesson and where we are, and also introduce Samaya Hussain, who's our new SME engagement manager. So some of you may have spoken with Samaya already. And then we'll move over to Stuart Walker from SP Energy Network. So he'll be helping with how to connect to your EV fleet and talking about some of the guidance that is available. Flexibility services, which is really important. Guy Chaplin from SP Energy Networks, he'll be speaking about that. And then we have a local authority, so Scottish local authority, how you can deploy EV infrastructure. So Ryan Robertson from East Lothian Council will be speaking, and then followed by Simon O'Loughlin from SSEN, and he'll be looking at e-tourism and the impact that has in Scotland and other parts of the UK, and the panel discussion and Q&A following that. So hope you enjoyed today's event. A good selection of our attendees have joined, so I'll continue and tell you a little bit about LESSIN. We can move to our next slide, Tabitha. So LESSIN, our purpose, I guess, is helping local energy systems flourish in Scotland, and we do that through collaboration. So events like this, bringing together various stakeholders to see how local energy system projects can be facilitated, predominantly in Scotland. So harmonizing the innovation support, there's a lot of support organizations in Scotland. How do we bring those people and organizations together to help with local energy systems? Establishing more initiatives, building the network, the knowledge exchange. There's a lot of knowledge that can be shared. We share some of that through the LESSIN portal, which I'll talk a little bit about in a second. We run activities and programs like this, and we provide one-to-one support to SMEs based in Scotland, and also funding and brokerage, what funding support is available, and highlighting that, and also looking at sort of the investment piece as well. We can go to our next slide. So this is a snapshot of what the portal looks like when you join. And as I mentioned, you can kind of see who's involved around Scotland in terms of local energy systems, the organizations, also the people. You can contact them directly through the portal. There's a number of groups we have as well, which I'll show in a second, specifically around energy system themes that you can join. And you can look at other support organizations and be referred across to those in Scotland, and also keep up to date in terms of the latest funding news and local energy systems news in Scotland. And if we can move to our next slide, please. So this is the snapshot of where we are at the moment. Obviously, coming towards the end of October, we've got 248 members now joined. Some of you may be members. If you're not, I'll be posting the link for LESSIN in our chat. We've got a LESSIN Scotland LinkedIn page with 231 followers now. We've run a number of events with 225 organizations attending. And as I mentioned, we've provided one-to-one support up to 37 organizations, and we will be providing more support. So as a LESSIN member, you're eligible for 7 hours of free support if you're a Scottish SME. So please do get in contact. And Samaya Hussain, who I'd like to introduce. Samaya, if you'd like to just talk a little bit about the one-to-one support and how that's provided from Energy Systems Catapult. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So hi, everyone. My name is Samaya. as it's been mentioned, I'm the new SME Engagement Manager, and I work in ESC, so we work within Energy, Launchpad and International, and within that team we've got Universal support, incubation support and acceleration, and I work within the Universal support team, and we can offer you free insight about the UK energy systems and provide you with any support that you may need as an SME. So it could be signposting you to potential funding calls, connecting you with potential investors and looking at various funding opportunities for yourself.
That's great, succinct and
Okay.
to the point, Samaya. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
let's move to our next slide, Tabitha. So this is some of the groups that I mentioned that are in our portal. So if you're interested in funding and investment or digital and data or transport, there's specific groups in the LESSIN portal that you can join and keep up to date on what's happening. If we can move to our next slide. So Stuart Walker from SP Energy Networks is going to be talking about connecting your EV fleet. Over to you, Stuart, and good morning.
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour, really, of a brochure that we have on our web for SPN, and it's also a collaboration with SSEN. So we go to the next slide, please. The next one again, and the next one again. So really, a lot of people are moving from, obviously, are looking to move from diesel and petrol with their fleets to electric, and number of challenges on it, not least the can the network cope with it. So the Scottish Government commissioned a partnership with SSEN themselves and SPN to look at, could we write a booklet, and it's on both our websites, and also a little kind of introduction, which this is, and really to guide you through the do's and don'ts, and also to give you the contacts for both SSEN and SPN to look going forward if you want to actually decarbonise your fleet, and kind of do a bit of myth busting and give you some case studies, which are small, medium and large. Next slide, please. That's some of the contacts. You can see it's both DNOs that are working on it in collaboration. So again, once this presentation is sent out, please read through the full document and jump onto our various websites for your area and have a look at it. Next slide. Yeah, so I think, what can you do for yourself to get started? And I think it's really assessing what you're looking for. And many fleets, many vehicles are in your fleet. Are you starting slow? Are you doing a big bang? So it's looking at that. What's the demand you're going to need on that? And there's some guides in our website to help you with that as well. And then when you kind of know your rough plans, maybe option 1, 2 and 3, then come to us and look to see if our network can cope with that. And sometimes it's a no, sometimes it's a maybe, and sometimes there's a bit of smart work that needs to be done on it. I'm not going to all the kind of smart technologies, because Guy's going to be on later on talking about the DSO and all the wizardry that contains to try and support later on. But there is what we can do with you on it. Next slide. Yeah, that's the one. Oh. So how can we help? So the number of things we can do. I think the first thing is to read through the brochure, but the number of things we can do with you. So we can assess your site. We can look at what the options are. Look at what the options. Oh, I've got a wee bit of echo there. So we can support you quite a bit on looking at your application, looking at any upgrades you need to do, and advising you on what you can get short, medium, and long term. And again, most people will want to go for super fast chargers, but if you go for super fast chargers, that has a major impact on the network, whereas you might not need with some smart technologies in night time or off-peak charging. You might not need as big a charger as you think you need or can go to. So I think that's a key part is having a conversation is about, what's the art of the possible. But I think early intervention, early conversations is key for us. Jump to the next slide, please. Yeah, so on that, there's a number of ways you can do it. You can just come and talk to us early on. We've got a low carbon technology dedicated team for the smaller connections up to kind of 5 or 6 vehicles. We've also, you can come and talk to us. We've got a new connections dedicated team with customer relationship managers, so we can talk to you on that. But you can go for a budget estimate, which is you just kind of put in a budget estimate. We give you a rough and ready cost on that. It holds your place in the queue, and it's indicative. But what it does give you is it gives you a feel for what you can get on that area. We can do, if you want to pay for it, we can do feasibility studies and optioneering. So we can look at the kind of, here's option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for your site, whatever you want. And it's a cost to that. But again, we agree the cost beforehand. And also at the end of the day, you can put an application in and we give you the formal offer, and in that we give you all the details of the cost and the work and the timescales. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's just really talking about delivery of your connection, which again, we get more into when we're working with you, but there's also other DNOs, other ICPs and IDNOs that can carry out the work as well. So it doesn't need to necessarily be us, and they'll give you the same similar advice. Next slide. So I'm not going into details on this again because the guy might go into it in his discussion, and each one is a presentation in itself. But we can do load management, we can do smart charging. There's loads of other kind of innovations we can do. There's Guy will talk about you can maybe actually get paid for the having your charging at certain times and get the whole kind of flexibility market going. But that's a future thing. Next slide. Yeah, and there's also to offset the overall costs, you can have on-site generation. Solar panels are a favourite for the roofs, the big garages, etc. But you can also there's micro wind and up to kind of commercial industrial standards, which low profile, stand about 10, 15 feet, and can generate up to 5 kilowatts. So there is other options out there for your depots and in areas that can help. And there's loads of different solutions that we can bring to you and in discussion. So again, if you just think, oh, there's no demand there, don't let that be a hit for you, because there is other things we can do for you. There's also, and again, probably another discussion, Ofgem brought forward a significant code review decision, which means that for demand, you only pay up to the point of connection. So if you've got reinforcements beyond that for new secondary, primary substation cabling and that, and the distribution side, then we pay for that and get the money back through the kind of socialising that with everybody. So that's a game changer going forward. That starts in April the 1st next year. And there's the website page on that as well, which will give you the details. And for generation, it's you only pay for the kind of the upgrade, the voltage level you're looking for. So again, these are different things that we can talk through in it. But again, so I'm doing a whistle stop tour just now, and again, we might do further one in more detail later on. But please do read through the brochure. Next slide, please. So just we finishing off, there's a couple of case studies in there. We'll try to give you a wee feel for, here's a kind of bus depot, a car park, kind of smaller example. The next one we go is a kind of medium, and then there's a large one. And it goes on the ranges of you don't need any, secondary substations. It's you've got the capacity, so that's only cabling up to you might need a secondary substation right up to no, actually you need a primary substation because of the size of it. But I think the key thing on it is if you're coming to us, you need to let us know, are you going to be charging at your depot? Are you looking for your fleet to be charged at home or en route or across the country? So I think it's having that kind of thought process yourself and then coming to us and having conversations, a few iterations back and forward, and we can advise you on what we feel is best for your site and your desired solution. So I think that's me. Hopefully I've made that within the tight time constraints, and I don't get a row off Patrick because he was pretty serious about me staying within my 10 minutes.
Oh, I look serious. Thanks, Stuart. So yeah, you were perfectly within time. We're bang on time. So over to Guy, and Guy is going to look at flexibility from SP Energy Networks perspective. Morning, Guy.
Morning. So hi there, I'm Guy Shapland. I'm lead commercial and policy lead in our DSO. Main responsibility is flexibility services. So we currently procuring flexibility ahead of time, dispatching and settlements of those services. Obviously a massive area of growth for us and very new as well. Quite an interesting and exciting area to be in. So I'm just going to talk through really this morning about what the DSO is, what flexibility is, how EVs and domestic EV owners, commercial and fleet owners can support in flexibility service and how they can take part, and just give a bit of a view of our overall process of what it actually is that we do, and how our requirements have grown over the last few years as well. So move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So within a relatively short period of time, we forecast that a significant proportion of transport and heating will be electrified. We also anticipate a further leap in distributed generation connected to our network. So coupled with a rapid rise of digitalization, this will precipitate a revolution in how both domestic and commercial customers interact with the electricity distribution system. These changes will result in higher distribution network utilization, more dynamic and volatile power flows, more complexity in network operation, and a greater need for whole system coordination. This is a step change from historical design and usage of our networks, which were built in an era of passive, predictable consumer demand. So we do not adapt to this new, more complex era for our network. These changes will push a system beyond that is currently designed for. This will lead to increased safety risk, high cost, and poor customer service, and inhibit transition to net zero. So this transformation also provides us new solutions and opportunities. Our customers increasingly have the desire and the tools to participate in the energy system, meaning there's an ever increasing market of flexibility service providers we can work with to solve network challenges and keep network costs efficient. So digitalization means that we can share data and better coordinate with other parties, facilitating these new solutions. The magnitude of these changes mean that there's a clear need to evolve how we plan and operate our distribution system. So creating a DSO where there's a clear need for a set of roles and activities to meet our customer changing needs. Most of these roles and activities build on existing business as usual activities, whilst others are new. These will in turn require new enabling infrastructure and business processes. So the flexibility services, so what is that? So it's where our customers agree to actively manage their demand or generation to help us mitigate network capacity constraints. They'll play a key role in helping us manage the pace of the net zero transition as they enable us to help manage network power flows within existing network capacity limits, so avoiding constraints. So flexibility services can be deployed more quickly than most types of reinforcement and can help democratize and bring competition to the energy sector. They provide an agile, smart means of managing our network and are complementary to reinforcement, providing solutions where we need to act quickly or manage uncertainty. So that's what we're currently developing at the minute within SPEN. So we can move on to the next slide, please. So here, really just building on that, we have a number of tools within SPEN that enable us to forecast load growth over the coming years. We can predict load growth right out until the end of ED2. And we have a tool, what we call the Engineering Net Zero tool, that enables us to do that. And that basically extracts data from key systems, so smart metering data, LV monitoring data, and it gives us a real kind of snapshot of how our system network is performing. And with EVs connecting to a network, with heat pumps, with DG distribution generation, what impact that will have on our network. And we can see here from this slide that the rapid rise in EVs on the network is going to have a massive impact, and that growth is significantly increasing right until the end of our next price control period. Okay, move on to the next slide, please. So here, so normally we would reinforce the network, as Stuart said, lay cable, build substations, but we haven't got the time or funding to be able to do that at the pace needed to manage our network. So if many people can take part in flexibility services. So if you're a domestic EV owner, for example, then we will have what we call our flexibility tenders that we currently run twice a year in April and autumn. And normally, if you're a domestic customer, you would be able to take part in that competition via your aggregator or supplier. So we work quite closely with our retail businesses. So Octopus Energy is one supplier we work very closely with, who we've awarded contracts with, and a number of aggregators like Zavomi Operations as well, who supply the smart chargers to customers. So from a domestic customer perspective, if you liaise with your supplier or your smart charger, they will actually recruit and work with you to take part in flexibility services. And what we'll actually do is we'll send a signal to Octopus Energy when we have a time of constraints, normally at tea time peaks, and we'll ask that customer not to charge their EV vehicle during that tea time peak and shift that demand to 2 o'clock in the morning. Early in the year, we actually ran a trial with Octopus Energy in Dumfries and Galloway, and it's called the Demand Shift Trial. And what we're looking to do there is a proof of concept where we got domestic customers to react to or respond to a signal provided by us, really to start managing generation constraints, because in Dumfries Galloway, there's obviously a high lots of renewable generation there that tends to get constrained during early morning times. So we worked with Octopus Energy there to see if we could get customers to respond to signal by shifting their demand from tea time to 5:30 on a Saturday morning to charge their vehicles, and that proved to be a real success. So we're continuing to develop these new markets and look at these new trials to see how we can manage our network more efficiently. From a commercial fleet perspective, again, if you've got a fleet, you can take part in our tenders. You can work with us directly because you've got the volumes. So you have the ability there to take part in our tenders. And if you're interested in doing that, please feel free to talk to me. We can talk you through that process, how we get you registered onto the system and actually take part in the tender process. Or you can take part via the aggregator or supplier. And again, with this, we're looking at demand side response. We're asking people to charge, especially large fleet vehicles or buses or whatever it is, commercial vehicles, shifting that demand to later on in the day, which will have less an impact on the network. There's a lot of noise around, or discussions in the minute around vehicle to grid. We're open to those discussions. We basically treat that as a battery on a network. So we'll look at what times you want to import and export that capacity as well. So we're more than open to have those discussions. So effectively, we need to be a neutral market facilitator. We can't be seen as a barrier to entry. So if you're an EV owner or you're an owner of any commercial fleets, you're more than welcome to contact us to take part in these flexibility services. Okay, next slide, please. This is just really a quick slide, an overview on the use cases we typically use flexibility services for. Mainly at the minute is to defer reinforcement schemes or to use it as an interim solution while that reinforcement is being built. The other part is looking at post-fault services as well. So if we have an outage or we're doing post-fault maintenance, we can use flexibility to support and provide that additional security to our network. Or if we lose customers during a fault, so CI, customer interruptions or customer minutes lost, we can get the network restored quickly. And we have a number of products that we have that support the network. We have 2 pre-faults and 2 post-faults. And we also have a reactive power product within there as well. But ultimately, if you have an asset that provides with the capacity, or you can shift your demand to a different time, then you can take part in this market. Value and flexibility, we currently use the counterfactual, so what it costs for the build solution, and we use that to set a ceiling price, so you get an idea of what we're willing to pay for flexibility. And then obviously we're kind of looking at a number of challenges with the flex market at the minute, so it's still very young in its infancy. Market liquidity is still relatively low, but we see that increasing. And obviously it's not widely tested yet, but these are the challenges that we currently work through to try and build confidence and liquidity in the market. Okay, next slide, please. Again, this gives a view really of the end-to-end process that we need to follow, to give you an idea of what needs to be done. So I talked about the NZ tool. So our system design engineers will model our network over the number of years to work out where the constraints are. They'll feed that constraint data to us to say we can have a constraint in Dumfries and Galloway during these times. This is capacity we need. And then we'll do all the counterfactuals from that to work out what the ceiling prices are. And then we'll run an actual competitive tender. We currently do that twice a year, like I said, in April and in October. We're looking to develop that to bring that towards more near real-time procurement as well, to try and, again, build liquidity. So we run those tenders where you would obviously upload your assets, bid in against that asset, and then we'll review where that asset is in our network and either accept or reject those bids depending on the prices bid. And then quite a large contract management piece to obviously manage the contracts once they go live. And then an area that we're currently developing at the minute is the forecasting capability. So we're very good at predicting load growth and demand in the future, but what we're currently missing is the actual network need, say week or month ahead, so we can provide customers and providers that confidence of likely utilization to give them the view for the revenue they can earn during that particular month. So we're looking at weather data, low growth data, smart meter data, and LV monitoring data to be able to give us that more granular level of the actual network requirements near real time to give our customers that certainty. So that's what we're currently working on at the minute. And then we go through to dispatch and settlement as well. So obviously declaring availability, dispatching the flexibility services through to settlement. So it's quite a small process, but it's quite a complex process that we follow. But if you'd like to take part, I say please contact us. We can go through that in more detail with you. Next slide, please. Okay, and here, this last slide really just kind of shows you the growth over the past few years. So we started our first trial back in 2019. We just trialed 3 sites and we had 160 megawatts. We didn't actually contract any capacity during that tender because the bids were viable. But since then we've grown, so our requirements gone from 3 locations through to our spring tender last year of over 1,554 locations. They're spread across our 2 licenses, SPD and SPM. We've got 1.4 gigawatts for requirements, and we've awarded contracts for awarded capacity for 555 megawatts. We're going to continue tendering to fill that gap and to hopefully meet that 1.4 gigawatts, and also develop our near real-time shorter-term procurement in there, as well as obviously flex services evolves and grows. So hopefully that gives you some confidence that we've seen a massive step change in requirements over the number of years. We're actually trying to grow new markets of flexibility and encourage people to take part. So that's a very quick overview of flexibility services. So I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Guy. So Q&As we will have midday, but there is some questions being posted in the chat. So Stuart and Guy, they seem to be directed your way at the moment, but if you want to respond in there, but we can also get to them around midday. So I appreciate that. Good presentation, Guy and Stuart. So in terms of the DNO perspective, that's one DNO, I guess, in Scotland. We will hear from SSEN after we hear from a Scottish local authority, Ryan Robertson, based at East Lothian Council. So he's EV Infrastructure and Roads Assets Officer. Good morning, Ryan, and you're going to give us the work highlight of the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. I don't think I need to introduce myself now. That was probably more succinct than I could have managed. So yeah, hopefully I'll start my timer and I'll try and keep within time. I do like to ramble. So yeah, next slide, please. This is a Scottish audience, so probably don't need to dwell on this too much. You know where East Lothian is, how big we are. Maybe don't know some more details though. So unlike maybe Edinburgh, who has 70% of households without driveways, in East Lothian, a lot of semi-urban, semi-rural local authority areas in Scotland, we have a high percentage of households which have driveways. Therefore, they can charge at home easily. 30% of 107,000, though, is still a really big number. So there is a high demand, or will be a high demand, for public charging. We currently have the highest number of chargers per head population in mainland Scotland, and these are distributed equitably amongst our settlements, such that people who don't have a safe place to park and charge at home, we could call them on-street households, are or will very soon be, due to the funding we've secured, will be within a 5-minute walk, sometimes even a 3-minute walk of a public charging site of one type or another, and often cases within that kind of distance of a variety of sites, so they'll have choice as well. Always need to say that electric vehicle charging infrastructure always sits within our local transport strategy, which seeks to emphasise active and sustainable transport, particularly shared and public transport. So we're not just trying to lock in car culture, because if we transition to a future where we don't see a 20% reduction in car kilometres driven, then it's not really a success. Cars of whatever type are still cars. So next slide, please. You'll see we try and get to this by not really talking about EV chargers. We talk about car chargers. We also do van chargers. We've got 12-metre long bays at one of our sites, which can support coaches as well. So it's actually all types of vehicles, but mainly our customers currently are cars. So next slide, please. This is maybe what our chargers currently look like. So on the left, we've got a journey charger. So this could be anything from 43 to 50 to 150 kilowatts rated output, and in the future we'll go even higher. In the middle, we've got destination chargers. These are will be connected for longer, so they can be of a lower power. They could even be as low as 2 kilowatts, because a lot of people are stationary for a very long time. A lot of people are stationary in residential areas. So at the very far right-hand side, we've got what we term an on-street bollard-style charger, which we're increasingly putting into residential areas where people will be parked for a very long time. So you can see that there's a scale of power output. Next slide, please. So we started with a simple scalable strategy, and we said that in every one of our 6 major towns, we wanted to have what we termed an alpha hub, somewhere where people could come if they didn't have a safe place to park and charge at home, and they could top up rapidly from one of our journey chargers. So we had at least 2 of those for resilience, and a co-located AC charger in most cases, again, for some resilience. We didn't want people to charge those types of chargers, really. We wanted to encourage behaviour change to more sustainable use of overnight clean green energy. So for every 5,000 population in a town, and our towns range from about 5,000 to 20,000 population, we created what we called a beta hub, where we had a number of destination chargers and tried to encourage people through tariffs and other terms and conditions to charge more slowly, preferably overnight or while they were at work. We also had in every one of those towns what we call an Omega site. This is kind of a backup charger, such that if the hub became inaccessible, people would still have somewhere to charge up rapidly in their town. Or if they were in a village, they would have one in an adjacent town. And increasingly towards the end of this programme, technology became available, form factors changed, and we were able to support people much closer to their normal overnight parking position in those types of bollard-style on-street chargers. So if we skip to the next slide, we can just see an example of one of our alpha hubs, and then the next slide is a beta, and then the one after that is an on-street hub, or an Omega, and then finally we have, next slide, is an on-street site. And then we secured funding midway through this programme to build what we termed a strategic hub. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is Walliford Park and Choose, was at the time the biggest, fastest, longest public EV charging hub in Scotland. And yeah, it's got 2 of our what we now term high power chargers. So these are 150 kilowatt capable in a sea of destination chargers. And this is really to promote park and choose. So you can choose to continue your multimodal journey from this location on by bus or train. So next slide, please. Just gives another view of these types of sites. And yeah, next slide. Yeah, so this is where we've got 241 chargers. This will soon increase to about 215 with all the funding we've got. We're currently provide the majority of public charge in East Lothian because market failure, because of effectively poor uptake of EVs. You know, if 70% of people in East Lothian have a drive, why is there not 70% uptake of EVs? Well, there's reasons that we can't control there. We're starting to see the beginnings of commercial investment, particularly along the A1 corridor, but there's an awful lot of hinterland in East Lothian and the rest of Scotland which still needs to be provided for and may not be commercially viable in the near term. So we've managed to foster an increasingly diverse, resilient and capacious ecosystem within our local authority area. So next slide, please. This just shows some of the things I've talked about earlier. And if you go into the next slide, start to get to the challenge. So we've got a bit of a, sometimes I say, a cosy catastrophe in East Lothian. We've got a lot of people with driveways in outlying areas of towns which look like this. And I've mapped all the residential houses here as to whether they do or do not have a driveway or a safe place to charge. Everyone in this area does. There's no requirement for public infrastructure here. Next slide, please. As you move even further out of towns, though, into the 2000s, we started to insist that developers build affordable housing as a percentage of any development. So you can see these red houses are ones that do not have a safe place to park and charge in private. By that, I mean a driveway in most cases. However, most of these hotspots of red houses actually have factored parking courtyards that are not the responsibility of the local authority. So those are the places where people will charge privately, but their needs should be met by a factor or some by somebody other than the council. Some of these parking courtyards are council, and in those situations we would look to provide, and we will be providing, those two icons in the top corner there. I've tried to put pins all over East Lothian to show where I expect there to be significant volumes of parking, where people will need some kind of intervention, i.e. they won't be able to throw a cable across a footway or use any other kind of intervention. There will need to probably be some kind of factored or public charging device. Next slide, please. So here's the town centre. So we've gone all the way out, found some problems, but if we look all the way back into the town centres, there's masses of hotspots of on-street households. So we've deployed a number of chargers. This is Dunbar. So we've deployed a number of chargers already. And if you go to the next slide, I think you'll start to see how we're be expanding that network. And then the next slide shows how everybody in an on-street household will be within a short walk. I think that's maybe 3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. So shortly, everybody should be within an ever-reducing travel time, walk or wheel of a safe place to park and charge in public. So we go to the next slide. This is where it gets to be a bit difficult in the kind of the border areas where this is maybe a 1960s council estate, and the travel times are a lot higher. You know, from the pin number 323 in the corner, it's about 3 minutes to get to any of those hotspots. So what do you do when there's not much demand to justify investment? So if we go to the next slide, we'll see where I have will be putting this year 2 chargers, and then the next slide, please, shows where in time we would hope to put even more chargers. Next slide, please, shows how all the people who won't be immediately served by, or immediately attractively served by those chargers, how they will potentially meet their needs. So a lot of households will just form driveways. There's no reason they couldn't have formed a driveway. They've just never seen a good reason to do so, but they will once they move to a plug-in vehicle. A lot of people will be able to use cable covers. We provide guidance on their use, and that'll sort them out. If you go to the next slide, we see that a lot of people who maybe can't use a cable cover because of the geography of the street have a neighbour who they might be able to drive share with. So this is, I think we'll see a great rise in peer-to-peer charging. So there isn't that much intervention required in that area. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see how I've gone to an even more detailed scale to map an estate and show where everybody might charge in the fullness of time, not hand wave and saying, oh, these will do this, these will do that, to actually look at all the intervention we might be required to make, or might be there might be a demand for us to make in the fullness of time, and to then to look at the actual quantum of sockets and how what technology we would use if there was demand, given that there's lots of unknowns in this, things are always evolving. But I have looked at it, and it looks like we'll need a ratio of 5, one device, one more traditional destination style charger for every 5 lighting columns, and one maybe lighting column style device or similar for every 3 lighting columns. So from that, you can start to build up an idea of the type of load that might be placed on the distribution network in these kinds of areas. And then obviously mark that up massively for all the private electric vehicle supply equipment and heat pumps that people will be connecting in the green households. So next slide, please. So having looked at the very kind of micro scale and upscaling that for a really big council estate, 600 house buildings, 900 households. So there on the left is where we'll be installing some devices this year, which will bring everyone within a 5-minute walk of that site. There's loads of other choices in Trinent just now. If we go to the next slide, though, you'll see where we hope to install some more devices next year, further breaking down that 5-minute walk time to 3 or 2 minutes, hopefully. And if you skip to the next slide, you'll see where we might do things next again year, next slide, next again year, next slide. So you can see we're building all this up and reacting to actual demand in these sites as time goes on. Next slide, I think. And then the next again one, you'll see, and finally the next one. So what does that look like again, the load in a network there? Well, you can see on the right, the approximate number of connectors and the potential kilowatt rating of those. Again, plus all the private UAC, not too much an issue in this location because almost everybody does not have a driveway. In fact, the only people who have driveways are kind of illegal driveways. So there's still going to be the load from heat pumps in there. So we've gone to the next slide. So we know kind of where charging what may be required, and particularly where it will be requested of us to provide that. But we really don't know because we don't really have lived experience of what the usage of those types of chargers will be, because there's so many different use cases. This is one report from Baringas, which neatly segments the market into different types of behaviour. But how does that work in real life in Scotland? We can't look to places like Oslo, where you've got something like 80-something% new car sales or BEVs, because behaviours in Scotland are different than in one city in Scandinavia. So we need to do this at scale to understand what the patterns are actually in Scotland. So I think I'll finish a wee bit early because I've rapided through this. So the next slide, basically just some contact information for myself. I've not put my email on there, I've just realised, but I'll put it in the chat. So really we're looking for partners who are willing to work on this problem and deploy trials at meaningful scale. We've done lots of stuff already, like other people with agile tariffs, with occupancy sensors, different electromobility service provider platforms. We just want to integrate all this and use East Lothian and the position we have and all the infrastructure we have as a bit of a living lab to actually test at scale, such that we can extrapolate from that to look at what we will need as adoption reaches similar levels to the Nordics or Oslo as a bit of an outlier probably in Norway. So yeah, those types of estates, 900 households within 600 buildings, or more distributed loads within that area of Dunbar or Dunbar town centre. All these really quite interesting places where in a lot of cases we have a good amount of infrastructure already and can expand that quite easily, so we can hit the ground running within any innovation project. And we've done a number already. So we've got tried and tested models for working with partners. So yep, I will put my email address in the chat and look forward to any Q&A towards the end. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was great. And I guess the purpose of today's event is having this look at an integrated approach and fostering the collaboration. If our other presenters are happy to share their details for people that are watching this either after today or joined this event, that they can get in contact and say, look, I've got some really great initiatives, or this aligns with my thinking, or just have some questions. And I see there's some great questions being posted in the chat and some good answers to those questions. Right, we're 1 minute ahead of time, Simon, so enjoy, and over to you, and we're going to look at e-tourism.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, I'll see if I can exercise the same level of brevity as Guy, Ryan and Stuart. Yeah, I'm Simon Laughlin with Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, or SSEN for short. And this is a project that I took over last year, but hopefully I'll be able to do it justice right the way through. If we have a quick look at the agenda slide, there's quite a lot for 15 minutes, but I will do my very best to keep up. If you've got the next slide. Please. Perfect, thank you. And we'll look at the background of e-tourism, which was focused very much in Scotland, what the findings are, where from e-tourism. We then had probably more questions than answers. So we looked at our other network area in central southern England to address some of those challenges, which would be common to the Scottish audience as well. And then I've got some links for further reading on the other slides. The next slide is a little bit about who we are. That's for you to read over when you have curiosity. But suffice to say, we've got that huge area of northern Scotland, including over 100 subsea cables, all of the Scottish islands. And vast areas of rural location with lots and lots of electricity network and not a lot of people, homes and businesses. In fact, 700,000 homes and businesses in that area up at the top of the north of Scotland and all the islands. And the little area in central southern England has over 3 million homes and businesses, to give you an idea of the scale there. Just to say as well, it might go without saying for this audience, but we are the electricity network. We're not a supplier. We don't send any bills out. That's the job of likes of British Gas, OVO, E.ON, EDF, etc. On the next slide, we've got the problem statement, but bringing it to life a little bit more, hopefully this predominantly Scottish audience will recognise those beautiful locations, Erkett Castle and Fairy Pools. And I put those on there because they kind of illustrate the issues that electric vehicles can bring to these locations and the electricity networks serving them in the future, i.e. they're absolutely great to visit. They're beautiful. They have lots of visitors and fantastic when you've got a petrol or a diesel car and you can fill up and go lots and lots of miles and then fill up at the petrol station in Inverness, for instance, up the road 5 miles from Erkett Castle. However, by nature, these sites don't have many homes close by. There's no industry at all near them, and our networks have always been built to accommodate the need. So there's small amounts of network with small secondary substations serving these sites. But when hundreds of people in years to come drive up, potentially hundreds of miles as well, maybe with their electric vehicles having a dozen miles left in them, and they all want to charge in 2 or 3 hours in the middle of summer weekends, our networks just aren't built for that. So we wanted to see what the scale of the problem was going to be firstly, and then what we could do about it. So on the next slide, we set out with 2 key objectives, and it was primarily to look at how more electric vehicles and tourist behaviours would affect our electricity networks, and then to look at where and when any increased demand would be most prevalent. If we go on to slide 6, we can see the areas that we chose for this, and I should give a call out to Element Energy, who we worked with on this, and they did an assessment of areas which had already been looked at. You can see there from what I was saying that some of the local authorities, particularly like East Lothian, have done so much work on the demand and the scale in their local areas. But we looked at the areas that hadn't been reviewed quite so in depth and picked 8 specific locations that gave us a good range of tourist trunk roads, like you see there, the A9, A82, A87, connecting Glasgow, Inverness, Skye, Perth, and connecting them specific locations like Portree, Fairy Pools, Dundee, and as we showed there, Loch Ness, Erkett Castle. And on the next slide, you can see I've jumped to a conclusion, but with the findings of there, on the next slides, I'll show you a little bit more graphically to illustrate this. But basically, the outcome was that isolated rural areas and popular tourist routes, they would have the most increased demand from electric vehicle owners travelling for domestic and leisure purposes in the future. The other finding on the right-hand side there is that the primary substations, which Guy and Stuart both mentioned earlier, are all saying similar things but for different purposes. They can cope really well. There's enough leeway within the primary substations to cope with the fluctuation of demand from a rural location, because they tend to serve towns, cities, even large villages as well. However, it is the secondary substations that will have more of an effect. And if we move to slide 8, you can see this on the Fairy Pools one, the first graph there. That has its rating of over 3 megawatts of capacity, and you can see there the projection isn't going to touch that at all. That's the big primary substation that ultimately ends up serving the Fairy Pools. But the smaller substation with a rating of just over 20 kilowatts, you can see what the demand will happen there. In the 3 lines there, if it's a little bit small, apologies for that. The lower line is January, but still you can see from mid-morning through to early evening will totally exceed the capacity of that substation there, the small substation there. And if you're looking at visitors in October, even for October holidays, for instance, it more than quadruples the capacity of it. And in August, there's just no way that that substation will cope with all the people wanting to charge an EV by 2023. And you can guess by the scale of that substation is going to become overwhelmed without intervention way ahead of 2023. If we go to slide 9, that's just to show you that how the Fairy Pools, which we've just looked at, corresponds and correlates with a major trunk road secondary substation as well. You can see the very similar peak there at the similar times of day of what would happen at Dalwhinnie filling station on the A9. And on the next slide, we've got there to show you how it corresponds again. There's Erkert Castle, and even though that's got a 200 kilowatt substation, so 10 times the size of the Fairy Pools substation, because that's what it's needed historically, it would still be overwhelmed in very much the same manner, the scale of visitors to Erkert Castle compared with the Fairy Pools. And that's another A9 one on the right hand side to show you, for instance, when you get up to a 300 kilowatt substation on the A9, still becoming overwhelmed at that time of year. So moving on to this, just to put some numbers onto these, where the constraints would and would not be expected. You can see Uig to Tarbert Ferry Terminal. It's not doing too bad, not huge amounts of difference there. But when you get to things like the Fairy Pools and the A9 and Erkert Castle, that puts some numbers on why we need to take action and give solutions to the local authorities, Visit Scotland, and the people that own these kind of sites. So if we move on now, that kind of left a big question. Exactly as Stuart and Guy said, just building more infrastructure isn't the answer. So the e-tourism project there was kind of coming up with this is the problem. We now know where the problem's going to arise, when it's going to be, which areas are going to be affected most. So what do we do about that? And on the next side, you can see again somewhere very beautiful, not in Scotland, but that's on the Isle of Wight. And that's a place called the Needles. And just over that horizon where you can see there's a big garden centre and a huge car park, and there's lots of nature trails and bird watching, and that's another place that gets a lot of visitors during the summer. So it's like the Fairy Pools, it's like Erkert Castle. We found somewhere very similar in our area in central southern England to do other reviews on. In fact, on the next slide, you can see we looked at ferry terminals again, as we had done with Uig to Skye. And we've got Southampton and East Cowes. We worked with the Red Funnel organisation as well, and their charging bays. There's a new woodland resort, think Centre Parks, but a lot smaller, to look at how charging might affect different circumstances when people are parked overnight. So differently from where someone would go just during the day, which we looked at in Scotland. And the Needles, where you could see that on the previous slide. So on slide 15, I realise I've got 6 minutes left, so let's get to some of these outcomes, which is probably the most interesting part, and the bits which will save local authorities, councils and the residents a lot of money in years to come. We looked at 5 key approaches to avoid the costly network reinforcement, and one of them was smart charging, so shifting demand. And as I said in the previous slide, where you can shift demand where people are parking overnight, so you don't have to have them charging at peak tourist times in the middle of the day or in the early evening when, as you'll hear on the news about the about National Grid and all of the DNOs, the peak demand between 4 and 7 or 4 and 8 o'clock, you would be able to start that charging at 8, 9 o'clock at night when there's going to be no issue on demand. So that's demand shifting. And then there's dynamic charging when people stay for a longer time. So particularly if, excuse me, thank you. Particularly if you have people staying a longer time, or you could, when it's a ticketed solution, people buy the charging at the same time as buying their ticket, and the charging would be from 9 till 11, say, or 3 till 6, rather than in that peak in the middle of the day to spread that load. Local generation, another option. One of the things that we thought at the beginning might be fantastic was these areas get visited far more on lovely sunny summer days. So would solar be the answer? But of course, you know, the sporadic nature of the British weather, and let's go with it, Scottish weather, it might not always be there when needed. So we looked at energy storage as well, and storing, say, wind overnight to use the next day by combining that with generation and storage. And then we threw in halfway through the project more novel EV charging ways. This included things like valet charging, so people could turn up in their EV and somebody from the site would take their car 2-3 miles down the road to where we have a primary substation or a network that isn't affected, and they'd have a bank of charge points there. Likewise, maybe overnight charging services. We could have park and ride, for instance. If you think at the Needles, or for a Scottish perspective, Castle, the ferry pools, you'd have an electric minibus that would be able to take people from a bank of charge points near an area where we've got a lot of capacity in the network, and you'd be able to give them the visitor guide on the way into the site and sell them merchandise as you drive them back to their electric vehicles fully charged a couple of hours later. So we looked at all sorts of different ways of doing this. And on slide 16, this is a report that will be published in November. So you've got a preview of this one. If you move to the next slide, please, Tabitha. Fantastic, thank you. A little bit of a RAG report, and you can see there's no silver bullet to this, but there never was going to be. But this is the kind of thing that we'll be able to help you through with kind of a cost benefit analysis. The report will be on the websites, as I say, in November, and I've got links to that on the next slide. But if we stay on this one just for now, you can see where smart charging and shifting demand, there's not a lot of cost involved in that. You just simply don't turn your chargers on till later on in the evening, or you request people don't charge them till that, and you release significant headroom in your capacity. But the practical feasibility of that could be complex. Likewise with smart charging, with the dynamic charging rates, very little cost to it over and above installing the charge points, but you'll release moderate amount of headroom, and the feasibility is kind of middling. Local generation and energy storage and combined energy storage, you've got a high upfront cost. It might not be as high as building a new substation, be it secondary or primary, but you will have a higher cost involved in those. But it will be nice and green because you'll be able to generate your own green energy for your visitors or your residents, and it will release significant headroom, or moderate in the case of just storage on its own. But you will have a bit of work to do in those as well. The novel EV charging, that's the valet parking, ticketed parking, the park and ride facilities. You'll have a minimal cost. you'll release quite a bit of headroom and it'll be okay. And it's relatively easy to do. And people are used to park and ride and valet and tickets for various things. So in my 1 minute left on the last slide, you can see there that we've got all the current reports are on sscn-innovation.co.uk. Sorry, next slide, if you could, please. On the top one, all our current reports on there, you just have to search for tourism or e-tourism. There's a project page on there. The next block down there is the Energy Network Association. This was an NIA funded project. So all of the results and outcomes and deliverables are spelt out in project papers on the Smarter Networks portal. And that's a direct link to the North of Scotland report there for when you get these sent out. And the Isle of Wight report, which you've had a quick brief snapshot of, will be issued and on the top two of those websites, top two links, within the next 28 days. And that's me. Thank you.
Fantastic, Simon. So I almost feel like providing a round of applause there, because everybody was bang on time, and for some reason my camera's decided to stop working right at this moment, so hopefully it comes back on. But what we'll do is move to our Q&A. If our presenters would like to please turn the cameras on, and I'll figure out how to turn mine back on, and also your mics as well. So I guess the most of the questions have been answered in our chat. So thank you for everybody for answering those and for posting the questions. Just a little bit of event promotion. So I posted in the chat about ETP's annual conference. So that will be next Tuesday in Edinburgh. And I'll be attending, but it's a great event. So if you're available, please head along to that. And also the following week, I'll be going to the Edinburgh Climate Institute. So they're holding a roundtable discussion as well on the 7th of November. So looking at the skills required for net zero and encompassing a just transition as well. So if you want more information on either of those, feel free to get in contact with me. So I guess first question to you, Ryan, in terms of the work that you're doing, and how sort of where do you feel you need the support at the moment? What would be most helpful? Or, you know, there's a sort of an innovation piece, there's a funding piece as well. There's the EV Infrastructure Fund, which provides funding for local authorities across Scotland in terms of deploying the infrastructure, and obviously working with various other stakeholders. So if you could maybe talk about that.
Yeah, so Transport Scotland's Electric Vehicle Innovation Fund would, I think, love to have bids from suppliers who are wanting to trial innovative solutions. That can be from, I think, feasibility to actual delivery at scale. So we're not talking, £10,000 worth of project. We're talking, let's go for 1 million. Let's go for 5 million. Let's, really blitz an area. Because it's not commercially viable to do this at the moment. Nobody in that council estate, very few people in that council estate keep an EV at the moment. And if we're to look at, the rate of adoption in those types of locations, it'll be slower than the likes of more affluent areas like North Berwick. So yeah, we need to do this, across a good cross section of a local authority area, including areas of low uptake, because those will be areas where, in time there will be higher uptake and higher need. So we can't wait for it to become commercially viable. We need to understand what is required for when it is commercially viable, so the right solutions are scaled up, not the wrong solutions, because it's easy to trial any solution and say, well, it worked. But yeah, it did work, but it'll be a very specific tool to keep in our toolbox for niche applications. So yeah, anybody looking to bid to that type of fund or any other OZEV innovation funding, happy to chat with them and provide a letter of support, and then agree a minute of agreement to host their project.
Yeah, sounds really good. I guess we all know there's grid constraints across Scotland, and there's particular areas that are more constrained than others. But is there anything in certain parts of Scotland, I guess, encompassing sort of fuel poverty and aspects like that, there needs to be more sort of focused areas? And is there any innovation support that's needed in those areas? Who'd like to answer that one?
I'll go
Simon,
with
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. My background, as I say, is in consumer vulnerability. So I've done lots of projects on helping the more vulnerable consumers, people in fuel poverty, lifting them out of fuel poverty. All the electricity networks over the course of ED1, our price control that we're just about to come out of into ED2, have done vast amounts of work with helping more vulnerable consumers. Primarily, it has to be said, with them during power cuts, so that when there's a power cut, people who have electrically powered medical equipment, who would be imminently at risk, are on the priority service register, and we can help them out with resilience planning, etc., for domestic households, and also businesses that are critical, like care homes and hospitals, even pharmacies. But from a fuel poverty level, yes, we've got incredibly high fuel poverty. I know in Spen's area, you've got Dumfries and Galloway as your particular hotspot. Ours with the Islands and Islands has far more fuel poverty than anywhere else in the UK, simply from housing stock costs, weather, temperatures, wind, all of it combines to be pretty bad. So we've got hotspots, West Niles, Shetland, Orkney, but also there's inner city financial hardship as well, and the cost of living crisis is only going to make that worse. So I know all of the networks are redoubling efforts to pull out all the stops and help their customers. Up until the last 7 or 8 years, I think Sven would agree, primarily it was seen as the preserve of the suppliers who have that financial connection to help customers financially. But as networks, we very much now look at we only deliver the one product, and that's electricity. If we can't see our way to help customers use that product more efficiently and safely, then what are we about? So we've got outreach projects to find people who are most fuel poor. We refer people from our telephony support. I've worked closely with the teams at Spen to work with Home Energy Scotland and refer people in for help there. We've got online tools with Energy Saving Trust to help people save. But coming on to the bit about the innovation, yes, we've got innovation in ED2 is very much geared up to help vulnerable consumers. It's the drive to net zero and consumer vulnerability that are the big things. We're finding layered benefits to what were previously purely engineering projects to see how we can help communities, customers, and society at large. And we're pulling out things like Guy and Stuart was showing earlier, and HomeFlex, which is helping make sure people have safe and are treated fairly when flexibility markets advance further. So all sorts of work going on. And I'm sure Stuart, Guy, myself would be only too happy to pick up on this at any point.
And I think just in the back of that, with all that kind of, squeezing as much as you possibly can out your asset that you have right now, and some of the houses aren't great. I think we're also jumping on to the LHE, so the local heat and energy efficiency strategy that all local authorities must have in place by the end of December 2023. We're working with them on, right, how can we use that to improve the fabric up to, category C or category B, because that's the biggest thing you can do and probably the cheapest way of doing it. So fabric first, but also looking at, well, if you're going to install a heat pump, air source maybe isn't the right way to go, although from a carbon reduction it is, but that can cause you major issues if you get 5 days at -5 degrees where the price goes through the roof. So go for smart hybrid that can jump between what's cheaper, gas or electricity, that's hydrogen ready. So when hydrogen comes on, you can switch from natural to hydrogen gas, but also have that supported with solar panels and energy storage. So bigger water tanks or phase change materials, etc. So we're looking at that, but also looking at, when the streets suddenly start to get EV chargers and the trickle down happens with that, how can we augment that to be a battery storage to support it, because it's getting that balance. And we're even looking at there's some great products in micro wind coming through now as well, where micro wind in your house was going to be the panacea, but it shook your house, you shook your roof off. So there's now new products where they're whisper dries, zero vibration, they run at 30 decibels, and they start from 5 miles an hour right up to 130 miles an hour. So really, really worked on that. So there's other solutions we're trying to bring in to balance off the two imperatives that the councils have, which is we need to decarbonise heating and we cannot increase fuel poverty. And right now, they ostensibly block each other. So we're working really closely with local authorities and our internal innovations guys to make that happen.
Stuart, can I ask, just in terms of some of those innovations, say coming from Scottish innovators or UK innovators, and the procurement cycles of the DNOs, how does that sort of progress if someone's got a really great sort of high up the TRL product that's available, but obviously you've got such a far ahead procurement sort of cycle?
Yep. I think that's got worse for us. So that problem has certainly got worse. Whereas we would talk about switchgear, and you get it in 6 months once you ordered it. We were in the processes sending out a communication with everybody, and it took us a month to get that to say it's going to go to 12 months. And in that period, it went to 18 months. And now we're actually talking it could be 2 years. So the global market is for various reasons is really being stretched. So we are looking at how do we do our procurement and how do we go further. So in one aspect, we're making it worse because we're signing up agreements with the big companies to guarantee that we get what we need, but that's the old school stuff. So yeah, on the ramp up of how do we if we get something that's, hey, this is a great game changer for low carbon technology and it really helps the fuel poverty, there would be a challenge, because if it was suddenly, like there's one product I like particularly, which is Ice Wind, and there's other ones out there as well. There's Alaskan hydro, which is fish friendly, small hydro. So there's lots of solutions that I would think, it's great. And if that was to prove to be successful, how are they going to suddenly supply? When they're supplying 50 to the world right now, how are they going to suddenly supply to Scotland alone, 5,000? So there is challenges on that, and I think it's about being proactive and discussing it. So we're talking very early with the councils now about their LHEs and innovations, and trying to make sure that part of that is looking at not just the procurement cycle, but also the just transition, so that we're not saying, that's great, we're going to insulate houses, install heat pumps, solar, wind, and by the way, we're going across to Holland to get all this labour to come across because we don't have the skilled people. So we're actually looking at how do we actually build the skills and look at the colleges and the local authorities, Skill Development Scotland. Paul's working with us on that as well from the South of Scotland Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise. So it's that, how do we, when money's strapped, how do we use LHEs and the climate kind of drive, which the money will be put behind, to try and support other areas that maybe cut back? Because the worst thing in the world when I seen it was, you had in Fife, you had the bridge getting built, and you had 3 aircraft carriers getting finished off, and 95% of the workforce that was there was not from Fife. And you think it's a shame, and we don't want to do that again with the 8 billion of loans the government's going to give, and the another 30 billion of money that commercially the councils are allowed to go and get. So you're getting about 40-50 billion pounds spent over the next 15-20 years. That would be a travesty if that's going elsewhere out of Scotland. So we need to look at the young workforce and get them trained up for it. So we are looking at that holistically. It slows things down, but hopefully in the short term it slows it down, but in the long term it speeds it up, and we're thinking of the future proofing of it. So a lot of work being done across all of it, which is great, but it does mean that every time you think you've got a solution, somebody says, have you spoken to? And you go, no, I didn't realise that organisation existed, but we'll have a chat with them. So
yeah,
much better in the long run, but yeah.
Great. Guy, any thoughts from you, or anything even on a different topic that you want to sort of highlight? And also I'll take some more questions. Actually, we've got a fairly manageable size audience, so I can take some questions in a second. So yeah.
Well, for me, Flex is obviously very new, so for us, it's all about education, trying to get people to take part and making it as easy as possible. I think people see that a number of barriers to entry, which we're trying to reduce, because as I said before, we need to be a neutral market facilitator and reduce the barriers. So we are actually working with the ENA and the Open Networks project to try and make it as easy as possible. However, we are open to new innovation as well to support that. There are a number of projects, big projects out there at the minute called the TEF projects, looking at near real-time procurement of Flex and other projects there. So we're actively working with those teams to see how we can then start implementing them into BAU. But it's a big area, so we're open to ideas. We're welcome to bring people in to talk about it and and to try and grow the market. I think in reality we've got a massive requirement for ED2. We've not really tested this in anger, so very good at procuring, but it's the back end piece that we need to start working on as well. And there's rumors in the market about having a single market platform. Is that the right thing to do? So yeah, lots of questions, lots of challenges, lots of opportunities that we're currently working through.
And I think on that as well, Patrick, is we're not just being insular and thinking just in Scotland. We're looking at all the DNOs talk and share it, but we're actually sharing now, not within UK, but we're talking to European countries. We're speaking to Southern Ireland and getting their views. We're actually starting to speak to Australia and New Zealand to get their viewpoints. And there's some really clever stuff that they do because they're set up slightly differently. So it's about how can you look at what they've done, does it apply to us? And even things like companies that have got agreements with manufacturers for low carbon technologies that can link through the householder's Wi-Fi and then put that on a flexibility market from a granular viewpoint rather than what we would normally do with Guy and others. It would be a kind of localised, okay, we've got a density here. They're doing it from oh no, it's just a measles on your map, and as it grows, and they can do it retrospectively, and you're thinking lots of really clever stuff. But Guy and his team, like Simon was saying, we're all overloaded with ideas, and trying to support every idea takes, if you're going to do it seriously, it takes 1 or 2 engineers a 6 to 9 month period to go through all the technical and legal and regulatory commercial parts of it before they can make a decision. So we're almost at a stage where we've got 10,000 ideas and we can work in 5 at a time. But hence why we're trying to benchmark and share. So as I said at the beginning, it's absolutely unbelievably revolutionary time for us, and new technologies will come out and there'll be winners, and we'll go with it. But I think we should be thinking solutions rather than products when we're going forward, and making sure that we're tying in with everybody, including this forum. I think it's great to to speak to the SMEs to make sure they can get part of it. I mean, we're even speaking to try to get the government to say, can we actually change the procurement model for working on if suddenly we say, right, in Edinburgh or in Orkney that we're going to do a procurement process, but we want to make sure SMEs get involved, because some it's 4 people or it's 2 people or it's 1 person, and we always think that the person that wins is the big contractor. But how can we make sure in the new procurement model that everybody gets a slice of that fairly and equitably, and also meaning that we can build trust with the SMEs, that they can go out and get apprentices because they know they're going to be 10 years out of work, so that they've got the wherewithal. So it's a really complex but totally exciting landscape.
Yeah. So you obviously mentioned the work in south of Scotland with Paul Wheelhouse and the others, and also today's event focused on transport, but obviously there's more transport options outside of electrified transport, like hydrogen heavy goods vehicles, which we haven't really touched upon today. But I wonder if any of our attendees today would like to ask a question in terms of the sort of whole systems and the wider sort of transport picture as well, or any sort of questions you might have. If you'd like to turn your camera on, introduce yourself and say who you are, or if not, that's fine too. So we've still got a little bit more time. I'll do a quick wrap up just to remind you. I'll do a wrap up, sorry, in 4 minutes, but to remind you, we've got our next event for LESSIN based on skills. Emma Dorr from Energy, the Edinburgh Energy Climate Institute, will be speaking in terms of the skills required for net zero. So that will be 24th of November between 11 and 12:30. But I guess final sort of closing questions if you've got any for our speakers today, and any sort of closing thoughts from you, Ryan, in terms of Scottish local authorities. You seem sort of fairly well advanced in terms of your planning. LHES is coming down track in terms of heating buildings, but transport is kind of sits outside of that. What sort of do you see as the sort of real assistance from a council perspective that you've had, and how could other local authorities get similar support, do you think? Oh, you're just on mute as well.
Yep, I think it's difficult, as I think Stuart pointed out. There is so much to do, and oftentimes a local authority hasn't created a post for somebody to concentrate on this, or as a part of a very broad remit, maybe including all active and sustainable transport, which means there's just not the brain capacity to deal with all these things at any level. So yeah, if think projects can get up and off the ground in one area of Scotland, then there's not that much variability. You know, yeah, there's cities, there's rural, there's islands, there's semi-urban, semi-rural, but outside those 4 family groups are much the same. And even English projects, again, much the same. So
I think there's 2 things that has been recognised on that for ED2. I think the first thing is that, as you highlighted, you know, in Scandinavia, if there's 5 houses and somebody wants an EV charger, they'll put in 3 phases right up to all the houses. They'll put in the cabling to cope with that, with the view that the rest of the houses in sometime in the next 15, 20 years will want it as well. So we're as well doing the work just now. So they've always been ahead of that. We stopped that in the 80s. So therefore we're always loading in minimum requirements. But Ofgem have said for distribution going forward, that's no longer the case. You don't pay the customer for the full upgrade. So if you're just wanting, 10 EV chargers in your local authority building or whatever, or in a scheme, then you'll only pay for the point of connection. And if there's a new substation required or a new primary substation, we'll pay for that. And it takes away the cost that makes it a non-viable project. So that's a big difference from April next year. I think the second part of it is we recognise the local authorities don't have all the knowledge and resources. So both SSEN and SPEN are appointing individual people. I think we've got about 15, 20 each that are going to be focused on local authorities to add that technical advice so that they can do optioneering with you, feasibility studies, work with you, and you'll have that dedicated individual that will be there for you. So that will help to bridge that kind of knowledge gap. So the stuff that you've done, Ryan, we should be able to support that with technical people to say, right, what are you looking for, and do the stuff, much like we've done with Lanarkshire on charge, and it's that kind of lots of iterative questions until you get to the most optimised. We're also both organisations going down the kind of digital solution map. So we have what we call the Connect More tool, and we've got a very similar tool in SEN, I don't know the name of it. But what that basically allows you to do is go in and just what you've done with your maps is actually go in and say, I want to install 5 EV chargers, a solar panel and 10 heat pumps. What does that look like from a network point of view? And that'll tell you it's okay, it's green. It'll also do auto route for you, so you don't need to worry about that. And I'll give you a cost and a reference number that you can go, actually, after 15, 20 different iterations, I think I'm settled on that one. And I can then take that forward. So we're trying to do an awful lot of new things going forward that will speed it up. It will still be a challenge, but once these things start to come out, we'll roll them out, we'll educate you, we'll have sessions, and this is a good vehicle for us to share that. I don't know, Simon, if you want to comment on what SSEN are doing, very much similar.
It is, it's very similar. And of course we are joined up. I used to work for a supplier, and it's lovely working in networks where we do collaborate far more. So I think for brevity, I'll just pop in the our services link for connections, so you can see the range of things that you've got there. But yeah, very similar to what Stuart described. You'll find it there with the tools and the maps and the competition in connections and new electricity supply links all on that one.
That's great. Well, I think we've exhausted all of the questions. I hope everybody who's attended today has enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the presentations, and I think a round of applause for all of our presenters today. I appreciate the time that you've put in and the wealth of information. We'll be sharing the slides and the recording after this event. Our next event, as I mentioned, 24th of November, and hopefully see you in an in-person event over the coming weeks. And thank you very much, and thanks to all our speakers.
Fantastic. Thank you all.
Thanks to
guys.
Tabitha as well.
Cheers.
Thank you, Tabitha.
Thanks, Tabitha. Thanks. Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.